Well, at least women's sports will finally be interesting sometime soon. I reflect upon the news of the week, and my God, there's been so much of it, all of it meaningless. But the thing that's likely to stand out a year, if not 5 or 50 years from now, but a year from now, the thing that's most likely to stand out is the great coming out of the alleged Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner in a corset. And where I immediately went with that was the realization that feminism as we know it is about to be taken over by men because men are better at social dominance. They're better at taking things over. So, what is the new name for the university's Title IX women's athletic program? The new name for that program is junior varsity. There's always been a junior varsity. Title IX tried to get rid of it, and it's about to be taken over by men. Not all men. It'll be a mixed sex, same gender, all one gender, all women, some of them with dicks and testicles. But it'll be mixed in that way, but it'll be taken over by men. And maybe the varsity program will be mixed too, so that the great bruisers like Janet Napolitano can finally find their way in life as linebackers. I invented the hashtag Feminism Patrified. So far, I'm the only person who's used it. Probably I'll be the only person who ever uses it, but I like it anyway. It's fun. Patrified, not petrified. Petrified is irrationally scared of some ephemeral nothing. Very appropriate to femininity, completely inappropriate to masculinity. To be a petrified man is to be a woman, in my opinion, but Patrified is a fun way of playing with the words because it's going to describe the state of formerly feminist organizations when they discover that they're scared of boys. But we now have a brand new solution to the problem of women in the Army Rangers or the Navy SEALs. We just had a big washout, 8 women training to be Rangers, and all of them washed out of the program, which is no surprise at all, because almost all men who would try to qualify for Ranger training would also fail. Only the far right edge of the bell curve of the stuff that they're looking for, even among men, qualify. Men are better represented at the far left edge and the far right edge of a whole lot of bell curves of human behavior, notably math, which got Larry Summers fired from Harvard for stating the truth about men at the right edge of the bell curve in the ability to pioneer in arcane mathematical disciplines. But we're going to find out who's more precious to the left, the feminists or the freaks. And I predict it will be the freaks because the ideal is to portray yourself as having greater moral virtue by reason of your willingness to extend your compassion where the other guy isn't willing to go with his. And so if women want to insist, XY women, women with ovaries, want to insist that women, XX women, women with testicles, aren't really women, then they won't be compassionate enough, and therefore they'll end up being thrown under the bus. We've seen all of this before. This is nothing new in human history. This happens again and again and again. This is the path of decadence. This is how civilizations decay. And so we end up with a news week. We had a dancing bear story this week. I'm not even going to bother getting to it. It turns out that that chimpanzees prefer cooked food to uncooked food in much the same way that most dogs prefer wet food to dry food. And so the conclusion is that chimpanzees are just as smart as us because they're willing to wait to get a cooked carrot as opposed to having an uncooked carrot. You'll note that the marshmallow test is in there too, and the implication is that chimpanzees are superior to toddlers in their ability to endure wait in order to get a treat. Dancing bears all the way down. What do you call a academic social scientist without taxpayer funding? A barista. That's what you call him. And that was what the nature of this experiment was. PhD candidates serving as valets to monkeys, and I think that if there's not enough jobs for them as baristas, maybe they could carry umbrellas for dogs so that they could walk more comfortably in the rain. But what we end up with as a result of scanning the completely inessential, unimportant news of the week is that famous attention whore Lena Dunham can get a certain amount of attention, but she can't get as much attention as Emily Sulkowicz, the pretend rape victim who carries her mattress around everywhere. But unfortunately, Emily can't get as much attention as Caitlyn Jenner can get by posing as an ugly man dressed as an ugly woman on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine. But oh my God, how much of an attention whore do you have to be? Well, apparently it's not even enough, because poor Bruce Jenner is elbowed out of the way by Denny Hastert, who's not even intentionally intending to be an attention whore right now. He's an involuntary attention whore. He's being attention raped because it's useful to sneer at him, but even he can't sustain the attention whore spotlight, because the Duggar family is the best target of the 2 minutes hate, only it's not 2 minutes hate, it's 9 seconds hate, because nobody can hold their attention for 2 whole minutes. And you look at this hierarchy: Dunham, Sulkowicz, Jenner, Hastert, Duggar, and you realize that this has nothing to do with what people are actually interested in. Out of that list, probably Bruce Jenner, Caitlyn Jenner, pretend girl Bruce, is the only one that's actually interesting to people, and they're interested because they're aghast and horrified, or eager to prove their pretend moral virtue by being more tolerant than the next guy, which there was a great big display of that this week too. The greater fool tolerance principle. I'm a greater fool than you. I'll tolerate more than you will. But only Jenner really is, well, Sulkowicz, of course, is a big attention whore, and Dunham is an attention whore, but and the Duggar family has turned its whole life into attention, its entire family into attention whoredom. But this hierarchy is not established by what people are interested in. This hierarchy is established by what political operatives are intending to get people to attend to in order to achieve some kind of short-term advantage. So Denny Hastert is there to get other juicy news off the front page, and the Duggars are there to malign all of social conservatism, Christian conservatives, etc., to put Christianity in a bad light. All of this, oh God, it's so disgusting, so sick. And in consequence, I ended up thinking about the idea of endarkenment, which my friend, my ersatz friend, my one-time friend, Billy Beck, proposes. And it's less a theory than it is a nightmare about the reversal of the Enlightenment, I guess. And I don't want to characterize the argument. If you want to go read it, you can find it, Billy Beck, Endarkenment. I don't credit it. I never did. What it really is a description of Marxist education policy, that much as I talk a lot about Marxist family policy, obviously the Marxists have infiltrated education. It's one of their most successful battlegrounds. It's the one they control most completely. And Marxism, as always, is just the opposite game. And so really, ultimately, what Marxist education boils down to is the opposite of education. Just as the Marxist family ideal, that families are created by men, that families are father-led institutions, that a family without a father is not a father, and therefore the Marxist solution to the family was the tender years doctrine, going back to, wow, 1834. How long has this been going on? When did you discover that Marxists are trying to enslave you? Well, they started in 1834 and even before then, with the tender years doctrine, the argument that children belong with their mother, that if a marriage is going to split up, the children belong with their mother, the person who is least likely to be able to support them at 5 to 1 their cost, which is what married men, family men, produce. Is they produce 5 times as much income as they would need to live alone and single. And this, again, is because it's a father-led institution. It's utterly, absolutely necessary for families to be led by fathers, and so Marxists say the opposite. And it's absolutely necessary for children to be educated in order for them to become civilized human beings, in order to be civilized, in order to have a civilization. A civilization runs on the informed discretion of the populace. This was Jefferson who said this. And so the Marxists take over education, and they do the opposite, and they uneducate children, and they teach children that their appetites and their feelings are paramount, and that any rational argument is an insult intended to hold them down. It's a microaggression. And rinse and repeat. This is the law of vectors: is that set a course, set a vector, put yourself in motion, and pursue that vector enduringly, and you will make progress. You'll get where you're going. It doesn't matter how fast or slow you're going. If you pursue the same vector over time, you will make progress. You will head toward that goal. And the Marxist control of education has been remarkably effective at producing an uneducated population, a population that is really completely, not completely, but at least partially incompetent to exercise that informed discretion. That push comes to shove, people will side with their own interests, but as with all of these displays of greater fool compassion, that I'm more compassionate than you in the abstract in a way that makes absolutely no difference because I'm not going to do anything anyway, except lord my greater compassion over you. How empty is that? And this is the proof of the success of Marxist education, is that people engage in these kind of displays and regard them as being dispositive, as being in any way meaningful, whereas it's only what you actually do that matters. Many people are well enough connected to their true interest, to the true interest of human life, that when push comes to shove, they will behave appropriately. And that leads me to the next step of this, the so-called Dark Enlightenment. And I've been reading around in it for about a month. With a certain level of aversion and disgust, and a certain fascination. As with a lot of outre arguments, there's a lot of wheat amongst the chaff, and the chaff is really repulsive and really stupid. And typical of outre movements is that its main line of argument is why the outs deserve to be the ins. That's what the Dark Enlightenment is really all about, is the reassertion of something like monarchy with the darkly enlightened somehow or another landing on top and being on top of this new ziggurat, this new hierarchy. The reality of brutality as a means of establishing or creating or maintaining or imposing order is that the most brutal rise to the top. And so pimply-faced geeks who bat away at their keyboard want to include me in that number. I'm happy to be there. These are the people who are least likely to end up on top in a society organized around brutality. I am aghast at this, in part because many of these people, or some of these people at least, seem to have come out of the anarcho-capitalist camp. And of course, they come out of the erroneous anarcho-capitalist camp led by Murray Rothbard, David Friedman, etc., the blocks, the idea of the so-called private police forces, etc., which is really insanely stupid. And I have talked about this here and there, but meet the third thing if you want to go read an essay on appropriate human social relationships, or look for my FAQ, Autonomism FAQ on self-federation.com. But the Endarkenment, the Dark Enlightenment, and then the one huge black bug of libertarian questions. What would you do about the poor? What are you going to do about the poor? But what about the poor? And the libertarian answer to this has always been very unsatisfying to me. The question itself conflates two categories, deliberately conflates two categories. So when people say, what about the poor, what they mean are, what about people who are born with completely unmanageable birth defects, or are simply blind, or in other ways handicapped, or in some other way are incapable of providing for themselves, whereas, of course, the vast overwhelming number of people that we describe as poor in the United States are not physically incompetent, not mentally incompetent, not genetically defective, not grievously injured in such a way that they can't provide for themselves. Instead, they, as a product of their own choices and as a product of the choices of the society at large, they have sidelined their talents. They have sidelined their human capital. Um, you could argue that they want to do better. People who want to do better are doing better. You don't have to get paid to work. And you certainly don't have to get paid to mow your lawn, take care of your weeds. You may not have the money to buy paint to paint the eaves, but every one of your neighbors has a little painting job and they have some paint left over, and you can take little bits of paint and paint that eaves to keep that wood from rotting. When people don't do anything in their own behalf, my conclusion would be that they choose not to, rather than that they're in some way inhibited. And this would include people who are handicapped in one way or another, that people who don't live in a dump, who don't believe that the universe is a dump, who don't believe that life is nothing but futility and despair, who instead believe in the efficacy of the human mind and in the ability for human beings to make their lives better through application of effort over time. Again, time in a vector, who believe that they can set themselves on a vector aimed toward better and move that way. Maybe not get there instantaneously, but move in that direction and move closer and closer over time. People who believe that way behave that way. And people who don't believe that way behave differently, but they behave the opposite way. And these are the poor that nobody wants to talk about. Welcome to the Church of Splendor, where we always talk about what nobody wants to talk about. Anything that nobody else wants to talk about, that's prime fodder for me. And the less people want to talk about things, the more I want to talk about them. So we're talking about three different ways of looking at the undeserving poor, not the deserving poor. The so-called deserving poor would be people who are incapable of providing for themselves and therefore must be provided for in some way or another. And the libertarian answer to that is private charity, blah, blah, blah. Libertarians are amazingly uncharitable people. If you look at their actual giving strategies, they don't, as a rule, give to charity, and when they do, they give to tax-deductible charities. 501c3, 501c4 as a way of reducing your income tax burden. It's a way of frustrating the government. If you ask the motive behind this donation, my guess would be that frustrating the government comes out ahead of any other beneficiary that money might ultimately reach. But that's the libertarian claim, is that the poor will be taken care of by private charity. I really find that incredible, unbelievable, especially when we take into account the undeserving poor, meaning the overwhelming majority. The deserving poor, if we're going to make that distinction, the deserving poor are the outliers. They are the rarest of the rare. And the much more common sort are the undeserving poor, which constitute the underclass. This is not a race or nationality or religion issue. This has nothing to do with that. This has to do with economic choices, a certain set of behaviors that we can identify among people who live in awful neighborhoods and who partake of government assistance and other indiscriminate charity stuff. So the Endarkenment despairs over this undeserving population. The Dark Enlightenment proposes to solve the problem with monarchy and essentially slavery, chattel slavery. And the libertarians promise to do almost nothing about it. And my take on all three of these is that they are instances of what I would call the fallacy of wishful thoughtlessness. That wishful thinking is the empathy for the impossible, the empathy usually for the anti-possible, the wishing for things that could not possibly exist, like the greatest good of the greatest number. We've talked about that before. Why all of utilitarianism is stupid, is impossible, describes conditions that could not possibly ever exist, that describe things that proposes to measure things that couldn't be measured in individual people, and then proposes to collectivize them, which is already an insanely stupid error, and then proposes to make statements about these collectivized things that are impossible to measure individually, on and on and on. It's wishful thinking all the way down. and you end up with wishful thoughtlessness. That the static market fallacy is one of these, that the changes that we foresee in the future will work out this way because they would have worked out this way if nothing had changed. You see that all the time in economic analysis. And you see it in political proscriptions also. The Rothbard Friedman model of anarcho-capitalism says nothing will be different when everything has changed. You find this argument among anarchists all the time, is that they propose to eliminate the sine qua non of the issue that they're talking about. They propose to eliminate the coercive monopoly of the state, and then describe a situation that is in no material way different, that it's exactly the same thing, it's replicated. This is what the idea of privatization means. Privatization doesn't mean anything. It means Nazification, creating a Nazi monopoly of rent seekers who will pursue ever greater governmental intrusions in order to increase their profit base, to grow their business. The presumption that free and equal people, all of whom are armed, would tolerate either a dark Enlightenment king or a Rothbardian Friedmaniacal cop is absurd. These things will not happen if there ever actually is a condition that reasonably could be called anarchy. That really is the big mistake that everyone is making with the undeserving poor also, and it's the big black bug for anarcho-capitalism, because the solution ultimately for the underclass will be a die-off, a huge die-off, one way or another, that the yeast in a cask argument of human populations doesn't have to be true, that we don't have to breed to the limits of our food supply and therefore have a mass die-off all at once, a mass starvation event happening all at once. That doesn't have to happen. It's not a necessary consequence. Enlightenment wasn't a necessary consequence, and endarkenment isn't a necessary consequence. And yet, given Marxist control of education and the Marxist destruction of the family, it's hard to argue that we're going to move in any other direction. This is the vector that we're on, and there is almost nobody pointing in any other direction. I'm pointing 180 degrees opposite. I am opposite the opposite game. And you will note the vast audience of dozens who pursue my videos week upon week. I am happy to insist that everyone else is wrong, but everyone I'm insisting is wrong is not so happy to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe he's right. And maybe I'm not right. Maybe I am wrong. But I hope I'm wrong, particularly about this. I see dead people. Not tomorrow, not immediately. I'm not declaring that the world will end Thursday. But the course that we're pursuing now is anti-human flourishing in so many ways that sooner or later one of these catastrophic vectors has to hit a tipping point, and bad things will happen. And whether that comes in the form of an economic collapse, or we actually do eclipse the food supply, or we have a catastrophic war. What happens when the luxury of telling other people what to do is so costly for most people that they have to become like the clan Testudo and close in on themselves, close that shell, close that home against the world, and defend what they have against chaos? That the world outside their home is so chaotic that they have to fall back on that hierarchy of values, the one that I talk about again and again and again: yourself, your spouse, your family, your home, your parents, and your extended family, your friends, your work. This is the appropriate value for a well-managed human life, the appropriate hierarchy of values, and this is the way that you actually do live, despite what you say about your outsized compassion. That compassion is meaningless because it's all just words. and the compassion that you actually express, the love that you actually express, the effort that you actually undertake, the work that you do, these are all done in pursuit of that near term, near home, near to your heart hierarchy of values. And that's completely appropriate. That's the way the world should work. But to assume that something like this, some cataclysm like this is going to happen, to make that assumption, and then to further assume that the world on the other side of this event will be largely unchanged, it'll be much the same as now, this is wishful thoughtlessness. And this is what the Dark Enlightenment argument claims, and it's also what the libertarian argument claims, that the libertarians say that suddenly there will be this massive enlightenment, the opposite of an endarkenment, a massive enlightenment, and everyone will have this epiphany, everyone worldwide will have this epiphany all at the same time, that they will forbear collectivism, forbear coercion, forbear tyranny, and embrace classical liberalism at an absolute minimum, and ideally, ultimately, anarcho-capitalism, that it'll be anarcho-utopia with nothing having changed except people's minds, and all that was easy and fast and fun. That's not going to happen. And we can tell that's not going to happen because it's already not happening. The Dark Enlightenment argument allows for the cataclysm and then imposes its new social order post hoc. What both of these presumptions and every other argument about the future fail to take account, in my opinion, is that in the absence of overwhelming coercive authority, there are 130 million firearms in the hands of private individuals in the United States. Most of those guns are owned by people who are very serious about their weapons. That we talk all the time about criminals and so-called Saturday night specials, etc., and criminals are notoriously bad at weapons maintenance. The surviving old criminals will be good at taking care of their weapons, but young criminals are reputed to be very bad at taking care of their weapons. And obviously there's inventory management that goes into this and all kinds of other things, all kinds of nice, cautious disciplines that go into maintaining a good, useful private arsenal. And those useful private arsenals are owned by straight, white, middle-class males who will resist the imposition of a Dark Enlightenment tyranny. I think it's completely funny if there are, it's reputed that there are Silicon Valley billionaires who are allegedly underwriting some of this Dark Enlightenment crap. And if that's so, if you really anticipate that you're going to be the king, I want you to count your bodyguards and figure out how many of them have to be taken out before you're a wide open target, before you are a white whale, before you are a soft white underbelly. Anyone who thinks that a cadre of knights on horseback is going to take over that straight white middle class male with his significant arsenal that he's got. You figure he's got a 38 and a 9, maybe a 45. He's got a 12-gauge shotgun, maybe also a 16 or a 20-gauge shotgun, probably a 30-06, and some kind of AR-15 kind of platform, or 22 long rifle that looks like an AR-15. The guy's got a half a dozen guns, and he knows how to use them, and he's got ammo for all of them, and he's probably got reloading equipment for the shotguns, and who knows what else he's got. He knows a lot of other guys who are good with guns. This guy is a good amateur gunsmith. Everything is going to change radically, and when it does, people who have a capital investment in the future are going to do very, very well in that cataclysm, in coming through that cataclysm. The other thing that people too readily overlook, I think, is that in the absence of overwhelming coercive force, there will be nothing to impede the pharmaceuticals market, the freelance pharmaceuticals market, that cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine in particular, those in particular, but other substances will be widely and freely available. If there is nothing to stop it, then nothing will stop it, and the prices will plummet, because the only thing that sustains those prices is the coercive monopoly. How does the government maintain its power? The would-be elite, the people who want to be in charge of everything, sustain a criminal class. At the lower end, the right edge of the bell curve, we have the ugly sociopaths who run everything, and at the left edge of the bell curve, we have the ugly sociopaths who keep you afraid of them and clamoring for the other sociopaths to dominate you. And if the ones on the right are gone, the ones on the left will run rampant for a little while with their poorly maintained firearms and ready access to any freelance pharmaceuticals that they want at incredible bargain basement prices. And the short-term consequence of this, of all of these things, of starvation, of gunplay, of availability of drugs, of every imaginable kind of squalor pursuit, everything that we claim to hold at bay by this coercive monopoly, all of that will erupt temporarily. Everyone will scold and shake their fingers and say, for shame, for shame, for shame. And that'll last a little while. It'll last 18 months, maybe 36 months. It won't last very long. And why? Because the people who are engaged in this kind of squalor pursuit will perish. That the government keeps the criminal class alive in order to keep the middle class clamoring for more government, and it keeps the underclass alive by impeding their access to the means of self-destruction. Killing a man slowly is no kindness. Killing a man slowly is no kindness. And the alleged mercy of the welfare state consists of killing the underclass slowly. That simultaneously robbing people of the human capital that consists of hope and plans and enthusiasm, goals, robbing people of their goals, and then keeping them alive like domestic animals for 70 or 80 years. Indolent, insolent, corpulent, morose. Not a happy life, just a life. Not even as happy as the life of the dumbass black cat behind me right now. Just a corporeal existence, just a pulse pounding. And no real human life. No quest for splendor, whatever. No enduring joy. No fondly treasured memories. Just a pulse. And that's sad. Sadder still is that these are the folks who will die in overwhelming numbers when Big Mother's teats dry up. But the other side of this is that the people who survive this cataclysm will be amazingly hardier people. Our Samoan friends are the inventors of the food pyramid that Americans have all become in the last 15 years, last 20 years. But our Samoan friends, Tahitian friends, our friends in the South Sea Islands got that way by genetic selection. They would take off in their boats looking for new islands, new lands, never knowing for sure if they were going to find any, not having good reliable maps and getting blown off course and ending up hundreds or thousands of miles away from where they intended to be, having been in these boats for weeks on end with little or nothing to eat. And the ones who survived were the ones who were better at retaining fat. From when they're on the land and they're eating lots and lots and lots, there's lots of fish and lots of fruit, and they eat lots and lots and lots, and it turns into body fat, and they're great, fat, corpulent creatures when they get in that boat to go looking for new lands. And the ones who retained the most body fat were the ones who were still alive when they finally got to a place where they could get more food, where they could eat again. This is genetic selection. This is eliminating all of the unfit breeders, unfit in the environment they were living in, unfit in the way that they were living at that time. Why are the people of the South Pacific so burdened by their corpulence now? Because they don't have those voyages to burn off those pounds. They don't go for weeks at a time without eating anything. this is what's going to happen to the population of the world. If we get to a place where we push this too far, we have borrowed against the future to the point that we've borrowed against more future that there is, that the babies who devoted their entire lives to paying off all of this debt aren't even born yet. We've spent more than their entire lifetimes. And when the shit hammer drops, lots and lots of people will die. And the ones who live will be better prepared to live in the world that they're born into. Their parents will be better, more thoughtful, more prudent, better prepared people, plausibly with very good arsenals. The children will be raised with serious moral instruction, a serious moral philosophy undergirding everything. That moral philosophy will be a part of every decision that everyone makes in that family, in those families. And these children will grow up to be amazing people. That evolution will out in one way or another, and you can argue that the human mind is an anti-evolutionary effect in the sense that we can make glasses and we can make canes and we can make hearing aids. We can make all kinds of prosthetics that enable us to overcome disadvantages that we might inherit from our genes or from injuries. We can overcome those things. But if we set ourselves in opposition to evolution, if we deliberately keep people alive to breed who have no internal will to live, who do not exhibit the will to live in the form of getting better, in the form of doing better, in the form of progressing gradually toward goals, these would be anti-evolutionary entities, organisms that are pursuing anti-evolutionary ends, that organism that pursues self-destruction, a type of organism that pursues self-destruction prior to breeding, will self-eliminate. And we're doing that anyway. This is what MGTOW is. This is what feminism is. These are children deliberately removing themselves from the breeding pool. They are successfully cleaning up the gene pool by removing themselves from it. And even if they insist that, oh, I'll get married later, I'll have children later, they don't. And when they do, they have one instead of three. They are eliminating themselves from the gene pool. Marxists are eliminating themselves from the gene pool. Libertarians are eliminating themselves from the gene pool. This is already happening voluntarily by people's free choices. But we are looking at major ugliness in due course. If the world ends Thursday, it's not my fault. But things that can't go on forever won't. And when the music stops, everyone who hasn't outfitted himself with a very well-fortified chair will perish. And the survivors will be much, much better people. I hate the dump. I hate the idea of despair. I hate the idea of failure. I hate the thought of humanity failing in such a huge way. After centuries of doing better and better and better, in just one century, in just the last century, the last century and a half, call it 2 centuries, we have reversed course completely and aimed ourselves straight toward the dump. And a whole lot of the 7 billion people who are alive right now are going to arrive at that dump prematurely. And that's a shame. That's a real shame. And that's why it's worthwhile to be grateful that someday soon women's golf will be worth watching. My name is Greg Swann. This is the Church of Splendor. I almost never talk about anarchism, and today I did, and I really don't like to talk about squalor, and today I did, but I want you to understand that what happens to other people doesn't have to happen to you. And if you want to get better, all you have to do is get better. If you are sick to death of dreading that dump, turn around and walk the other way.